Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Cherry Audio Elka-X tutorial series. Today we're going to have a look at the synthesizer in general, including a discussion of its layers. It's basically two synthesizers in one. In all of the episodes in this series so far, we've only dealt with the upper layer, basically half of the synthesizer. Today we'll bring in the lower layer as well. If you're enjoying this series so far and you want to help support my channel, check out the Patreon and YouTube channel member links below. Awesome way to do that. Okay, let's have an introduction to the concept of layers. I'm going to press new again to get us back to our completely default standard sound. And as usual, I'm going to turn oscillator 2 off. I'm going to put myself in monophonic mode, and there we have a simple sawtooth wave. That sawtooth wave is being generated on the upper panel. If you have a look down in the lower right hand corner, you've got a panel control box here, and the upper light is currently lit. Over on the top left hand corner we have this keyboard section which tells us that we're in single layer mode. If I engage double layer mode instead, you saw this light engage in the master section. We're going to deal with all of these sections today, just basically giving you a brief introduction at the moment. But now we've actually got two different layers. Without touching the synthesizer anymore, I'll press a single note. Now that's quite clearly, you can see in the oscilloscope and here, that's no longer a simple sawtooth wave. Let's turn the volume down of the sawtooth in oscillator 1. Press the key again. Okay, where is that sound coming from? That's the lower layer, and you can quite clearly hear and see there are two oscillators playing against each other there. You gain access to the lower layer from this panel control. Let's press the lower button and watch very carefully the oscillator section. Okay, did you see the volume switch? And now we've got green lights instead of red. This is the lower layer, and you can see two oscillators in action. Let's switch them to triangles and press the key again. So there's your simple triangle wave being replicated by two oscillators. Go down to a single oscillator and zoom in a little bit so that we can see it more clearly. There you go. Over on the upper layer, we still have our sawtooth. Let's turn it back up. And now when I press a key, you're going to hear the combined sawtooth from the upper layer and the triangle from the lower layer. And there's the complex shape made by the two. You see elements of the triangle wave and elements of the sawtooth wave. That's the composite of those two different waveforms. So we've just stacked these two layers on top of each other, and we've basically got two simultaneous synthesizers. Now, the vast majority, when I say two synthesizers, the vast majority of the functions in this synth are replicated for the two layers. There are a few modules that are global. LFO2, which is predominantly to do with the modulation wheel and the pitch bend wheel, they're common. The master controls in the master section are entire synthesizer wide. What else have we got? The sequencer, we've not dealt with that yet. That's also common. And the number of voices, this is really important. If you've got your maximum number of voices set to 6, you play a 4-note chord. If you're using 2 layers, then some of those notes are going to get thrown away. But by and large, the synthesizer is duplicated. Even the effects banks, which again we haven't really spoken about in detail yet, they're also completely independent for each of the layers. Okay, let's have a look at some of the stuff that we can do. So here we are, we press a note and you can hear both of those things simultaneously. If you want to edit one of those layers and get into the habit of looking at this panel control to make sure you're editing the right layer, as I click between these two different settings, just have a look at the sawtooth and triangle options in the oscillators. But it's true for all of the controls in the synthesizer. Just move the decay on one of the layers. There you can see that decay control toggling backwards and forwards. When you're editing them, you can press the layer solo button so that now we can only hear the upper layer, and you can see it flashing. There's our sawtooth. If I flip over to the lower layer, the layer solo button turns green, telling us that we're still in solo mode. We can only hear half of the synthesizer, and this time we can hear the triangle. Turn the layer solo light off. Okay, so at the moment we're in lower panel mode. We've got the composite wave, those two different waveforms being combined again. If I switch back to keyboard single mode, watch what happens with the panel control. It automatically reverts to the upper layer because there is no lower layer in single mode. And now all we'll hear is the sawtooth. So it's really important to get used to how these two layers interact with each other. The moment you enter double mode, you've got access to both upper and lower layer, and you use these buttons to visually see how that sound is constructed. You use the layer solo to only hear one sound at a time. We've also got independent layer volume controls. So there's our composite sound again. Turn the lower layer all the way down. We can still hear the sawtooth. Press the upper panel. You can see the layer volume flick back again. And obviously we can mix those two things to taste. We've also got layer pan. So let's throw the sawtooth over onto the right hand side and the triangle over to the left hand side. Sawtooth's a bit dominant there. That's kind of cool. If you're listening in stereo, it is anyway. Now here's an interesting artifact of something I did right at the beginning of this tutorial, almost without thinking about it. I put the upper layer in mono control, but I didn't actually click that button for the lower layer. Can you see that the lower layer is still polyphonic? Which means if I press a chord, only the triangle is going to be represented on two of those three notes. I'm going to press that chord again, but I'm going to start from C and go up, play C, E, G. Okay, now the sawtooth element of the sound that you're hearing is the last note that was played, because the upper layer, let's just solo it to make it a little bit easier to figure out what's going on. Play the chord again. You're only hearing the G, the last note that was played. The lower level, however, is capable of playing all three notes simultaneously. There's our soft triangle tone. When we bring both of those two sounds together, okay, if I press the same chord, but this time coming down from G, now you can hear the sawtooth being played by the C, which is the last note that I played, but again, all three notes of the triangle are sounding. So that's the way that the oscillators work. If you ever exceed the maximum number of voices available to you, the first note that you played is the one that's going to get thrown away. It'll always hold the youngest version of any combination of notes that you're playing. But it's also a good illustration of the independence of these two layers. Got completely different functionality between these two. Now, one of them is polyphonic, one of them is monophonic. Okay, let's have a look at the next keyboard mode now. And this isn't something that I use because it's predominantly a performance-based thing, and it's called split. And what we've done now is, instead of layering the two layers on top of each other so that all notes from all keys play all the time, we've split the keyboard in half vertically. So now all the notes up to but not including this note will be played on the lower keyboard. Here's all our triangle notes, playing B3 here, and as soon as I move up to C4, we've switched over to the upper layer, and all of the notes above C4, there and above, will be played on the upper layer. That's really if you're left-handed and you're right-handed doing different things. I'm barely capable of playing the synthesizer with one hand at a time, and I never use split mode, but that's what it's for. If you press the button again, you can see the light starts flashing. This allows you to set your split point. Pretty obvious what's going on there. Let's head back to double mode. Now we've got an opportunity to tie up a loose end from a previous episode. When we had a look at LFO2, I said basically ignore this control yet because we haven't talked about layers. Should be pretty obvious what's going on here. I'm going to turn the modulation wheel all the way up. We've got vibrato because LFO2 says that there's going to be vibrato, and it's operating on both layers. If I switch it to lower only and solo the layers so we can hear clearly what's going on. There's the triangle, vibrato. Sawtooth is static. Please don't ask me to demonstrate upper as well. Pretty obvious what's going on there. Okay, I've made lots of changes to the synthesizer there. It's all in a bit of a mess. Let's press the new button, get us back to our default state. Let's have a look at a couple of buttons in this lower panel that we haven't dealt with yet. All of the controls in this panel are per layer, don't forget. It's only the keyboard options above. In fact, it's why this panel has been split. These two panels have been split. These are global to the entire synthesizer. These are per layer. Just turn my mod wheel back down, get rid of that vibrato. I'm going to engage chord memory, and you'll see the light start flashing It's now waiting for me to start pressing keys on the keyboard. If I press C, E, G, and then let go, the moment I let go of all of the keys, the light goes out. The synthesizer's now remembered that I want to play a major third and then a minor third on top. In other words, I want to play a major chord. If I press a single note, I'm just going to press C. You can see on the lower keyboard, I'm only pressing a single note, but you're hearing the chord. Press the button again, turn the feature off, and it's lost its memory. When I turn it on again, the light starts flashing again, asking me for a new thing. This is really cool for interval-based music. So if I press a C and a G, I've now set up a perfect fifth interval. So every time I press a note on the scale, let's play a scale of C major. They're all perfect fifths. Now, there's a very good reason why I only pressed 6 notes on the scale there, because if you have intervals set up like this, you need to be aware that some of the notes that you play in what would otherwise normally be your scale will now be dissonant. If I press a B, we're also playing an F sharp there, which is not in the scale of the C major that otherwise I was playing. So just bear in mind that the keyboard doesn't know what you're doing. There's no feature here to move notes to the nearest note in a particular scale. It's literally just going to play something, in this case, 7 semitones higher than the key that I played, and that might be outside of the scale that you're otherwise trying to be in. In C major, B is the only note that has a 7-note interval outside of the scale. All of the other 6 do comply. That's one of many reasons why the perfect fifth is the king of the harmonic notes. It's just really strong. It's the root of all power chords. Heavy metal guitarists of the world unite. Let's turn that off and have a look at multi-trigger. So what's going on here is, at the moment, every key on the keyboard has its own envelope. The easiest way to demonstrate this is with the filter. I'm going to put myself in monophonic mode and set a pretty dull filter with masses of envelope. I want to get to the stage where, there we go. It's really obvious what the filter's doing every single time I press a note. Now what I'm going to do is play the notes legato. So I'll play my C. Now I'm going to hold that note down and play E, and then G. And you can see on the lower keyboard I've got 3 keys held down. So this allows me to play legato and have that envelope operate on every single key that I play, because we have multi-triggers. If I turn multi-trigger off, now what's going to happen is that when I press a key on the keyboard, the envelope will trigger, but for as long as any key on the keyboard is held down, the envelope won't trigger again. So I'll do exactly the same thing. There's my C. I'm going to hold C down and play E. And the E is dull. The envelope doesn't fire. In other words, we've basically got to the end of the envelope's journey. And as long as I've got some keys held down, all of these notes are going to be dull. The moment I let the keyboard go, there's our envelope again. So if I play individual notes, but legato, that's multi-trigger. When you press the new button to initialize your synthesizer, the default behavior is multi-trigger to be on. That's the standard behavior. When you disengage it, you get something that is very often heard in a Moog, where you'll press a key down and then all of the other notes remain dull until you let go. And you can do, very good. Rick Wakeman was fabulous at this, knowing the difference between taking all of the keys off and getting some of the attacks, but then also some blurriness in between them. It's a fine art. Not something I'm particularly good at, to be honest. Just a couple of more things to look at today before we wrap it up. I've got a limiter here right at the end of the synthesizer, and again, by default, it's on. What this is designed to do is to protect basically the outside world. If you've got everything cranked up to 10 and you've turned too many volumes up, I turn the limiter off and my master output down, then the signal coming out of this synthesizer is very big. You can see it in the oscilloscope. If I turn the limiter on, it just attenuates the signal, brings it back into some sort of reasonable range. Generally speaking, try to avoid 2 red lights going on. You're going to enter the situation where the synthesizer starts distorting. Now, it's an analog synthesizer. Analog distortion can be good, but just use it with care. And generally speaking, having the limiter there to control these output levels is once again the default behavior, but you can override it. Master volume is totally self-explanatory. And the last one that we're going to have a look at today is this little Q button right up at the top of the synthesizer. This is called oversampling quality. Now, without getting into a whole tutorial on what oversampling is, basically whatever your sampling rate is, mine's 44.1 kilohertz, that's actually pretty low. And it's quite possible to introduce a concept when doing digital to analog conversion, because we've got a digital system here. We're working in the digital world. So there's going to be D to A conversion. And that means you're going to introduce this concept called aliasing, which is going to degrade the quality of the sound. If I set myself up a really simple sawtooth gain, and I make the filter circuit work quite hard. Filtering is one of the ways where you can really hear aliasing, because the filter circuit is operating in basically very high frequencies. Okay, I've just configured this sound that's really nasal, really high resonance spike, and I've zoomed into this area 14 to 18k. You see the wave bouncing around. This is basically aliasing all of those frequencies above the sampling rate that have been basically folded back on ourselves. We're getting interference from harmonics that don't want to be there. If I introduce oversampling, watch these waves dancing up and down, and then go to 4 times oversampling, suddenly the wave is much more stable. There's hardly any action there. So you just basically get a higher quality replication of what the analog synthesizer is trying to do. As with all things in life, there is an overhead. If I hold a note down, you can see the memory here is 1430, and switch to 4 times oversampling. More memory is just being consumed. Only 30 meg, but you know, that's one note on this synthesizer being played. Basically, the processing and memory overhead go up when you introduce oversampling. If you've got a computer powerful enough to handle it, and you hear any reason why you think you need to increase the oversampling, there's your option. That'll do us for today. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Please hit like if you did. I'll see you again. Thanks a lot.